proclamation of hope and encouragement. And in the background, before the verses start, we have some preliminary verses in the chapter. And they describe what Jesus and his scribes are doing. In a minute, I'm going to have Pat read those verses, which will describe the setting better. But I want you to know, at this point, Jesus had already made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And he'd been there a couple of days and was very well received, as you all know. But of course, he was recognized and proclaimed by those who had heard of his miracles and his teaching and his presence. He was proclaimed as the next king coming. And many of his followers felt that he was to be a powerful king and that he would relieve them of the oppression they had been suffering, just like some of the rebelling nations today have great hopes that they are getting rid of their oppressor rulers and will bring in a ruler that will give them freedom in their own country and in their own government. But that, of course, as we know, is not the case. But after these first few days and the triumphal entry in Jerusalem, Jesus has retreated to this Mount of Olives, which is only 1,000 yards east of the temple, with his disciples. And Pat, will you read those opening verses in chapter 13?
Do you want both of those sections?
Yes, please.
This is chapter 13, 3 to 8. When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." And then the other one.
In these next few verses, he answers them. This is Jesus answering that question.
"But when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, let the reader understand that those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down or enter the house to take anything away. The one in the field must not turn back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not be in the winter, for in those days there will be suffering, such as not been from the beginning of creation that God created until now, no, and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he has cut short those days. And if anyone says to you at that time, 'Look, here is the Messiah,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be alert, I have already told you everything. But in those days, after the suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heaven will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the ends of heaven."
Does that prompt any reaction for any of you?
Oh, I'm the elect.
Beg pardon?
How do you get to be the elect?
Yeah, how do you get to be the elect? Yeah. Well, I think the verses will help us with that as we go along. I'd like to return back now to verse 14 and talk just a little bit about what that verse has said. This desolating sacrilege, which we discussed earlier, were those practices carried on in the temple during the reign of Antiochus. And he had sacrificed swine there in the innermost secret of the temples. And you will also see that parenthetical phrase that Mark has inserted in this, let the reader understand. And to take the verses alone, or just this section of verses, we don't know what it's about. But I think the background we've already talked about indicates that it was this sacrifice of swine in the Holy of Holies. Going on to verses 15 and 16, the one on the housetop must not go down or enter the house or take anything away. The one in the field must not turn back to get a coat. Now when that happens, Pat, we just don't have time for our lipstick or anything else. We've got to run. And the point is, run for your life. Take nothing, for the only comfort and security can be found only with God.
I don't understand verse 17 at all.
We'll get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
I'm safe there.
Is anyone prepared to leave that fast? Have you thought about what we must do should that time come?
Well, when a tornado comes, you have to think about it.
Well, that's a little different, Jane. Pat and I have under the staircase going downstairs a little room, and we'll throw all the luggage out of there, and we have a pail in there with extra shoes and water. Is there any cookies in there, Pat? And, you know, we're prepared. I even have a crowbar in case the house collapses, and it might be useful in freeing ourselves should it become that bad. But we're prepared. We had time to think about that ahead. Now I think it's time to think ahead when this other happens. There'll be no sanctuary under the staircase for us. And let's go on to 17 and 18 then. Would you read that for us, please?
Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not be in winter.
Thank you. The interpretation that the scribes, if you will, have given us about those verses are that raising a baby is a difficult thing, very difficult. And of course, Jesus understands that, and he just hopes that it cannot be, of course, that there won't be babies at that time, but he just hopes that for the sake of those who have to go through it, that they are not the ones who have these infants or are about to have these infants. And I think it glorifies the responsibilities of parenthood, especially of motherhood, and glorifies the responsibilities and demands that a baby puts especially on the mother. My notes say, think of fleeing to the mountains with an infant in the difficulties, a time of intense suffering indeed. And the point is, are you getting Jesus' message? When things are falling apart, it's too late to rectify the situation. Do not worry about anything left behind. It will not be there when and if you return. I think we need to think on that. And do the pastors have any comments on that? Have you given any thought to that, pastors?
Yeah, I do.